Good evening and welcome to We Are Not Cattle Radio. I am your host, Jake Counts, navigating you through this crazy world that we live in. It is, good gosh, I literally just sat down. It is the 18th day of February, 2014, and we'll be live here for the next hour. And I should be joined here momentarily by a couple of different people. We're going to chat about the future of government. What do we think that the future of government holds for not only America, but for the world in general? So, should be an interesting topic of conversation. Obviously, something near and dear to my heart because I advocate for self-government and in this paradigm that we live in currently for a complete paradigm shift. But, that's neither here nor there. I'm actually going to try to open up the forum, open up a dialogue to people. If you want to call in, be a part of the show, feel free to call in. It is the number to call in is 602-753-1916. Once again, that's 602-753-1916. And gosh, it has just been absolutely bonkers. So I think I have somebody on the line with me. Are you on the line currently? Mr. Wiley, are you there? I think that we have some technical difficulties. We'll try to get those straightened up here. So anyway, I'm going to play a brief clip, and then when I come back from this break, hopefully we'll have everybody straightened up. But this is off of YouTube under Man Against the State. It is called Government Explained, and it's just the last 3 minutes. So hopefully you guys will get to enjoy some of this because this really does put it in perspective. And if you watch the entire 9 minutes, it will really put into perspective what we're dealing with from a consciousness standpoint and how we're going to have to basically deprogram everybody to understand what government is and what it does and what it's there for. And this little clip, to set the clip up, is a guy trying to explain to an alien what government is. So here's Government Explained. Enjoy, everyone.
How does a regular human become a politician?
Well, that's the great thing about our government. It's a democracy, and that means that the people actually have the power, because we get to decide who among us get to be the politicians. We get to vote. And if a politician starts doing things we don't like, we can just replace him with someone else at the next election.
So the people that get chosen to be politicians only get to boss people around and take their money for a short time, and then they go back to being regular humans?
Exactly.
That sounds like a powerful position to be in. But if you get to choose who does that, I assume that politicians are always the wisest, most honest, caring and respected people among you.
Well, no, not really. I wouldn't say politicians are known for being honest, or wise, or caring, and they're certainly not the most respected people among us. Come to think of it, most politicians are lying, power-hungry crooks.
The ones you chose?
Yeah, they're always doing things we don't like. They use taxpayers' money to enrich themselves and their friends, and they never keep their promises to voters. They've been caught stealing and lying and taking bribes, and they mostly do what the big corporations want. Yeah, they're always doing stuff like that. They're completely corrupt. They're a bunch of lying crooks.
But you said that most humans know that stealing and beating each other up and killing are wrong. And you said that you have the power because you can change who's in charge. So why don't you just replace the lying, thieving, murderous, crooked politicians with some regular people?
Well, we don't try to elect lying crooks. It just always turns out that way. But we have to have a government because some humans are nasty and might kill or enslave or steal. Civilization just couldn't survive without government.
Let me get this straight. Because you're worried about the small number of nasty people that are willing to kill, enslave and steal, you think it's necessary for your survival to have a system where some humans among you, for a short while, get to call themselves the government, and they get to order everyone else around like slaves and, if they want, commit mass murder overseas, using money they stole using threats of violence. Politicians get to kill, enslave, and steal, because if they didn't, someone else might. And you try to elect good, honest people to be politicians, but what happens every time is that the people you elect turn out to be corrupt, evil, lying crooks. That's your system.
Yeah, that's pretty much government.
So that was that's a short clip, and it's based on a talk by Larkin Rose, and it says it was produced by Graham Wright. So kudos to you guys for enlightening everybody with something that everyone can understand. A cartoon alien and a cartoon human being having a conversation of what is government. That actually ties me back into something that I watched Adam Kokesh do, and that was, gosh, I think it was a couple of months before he got arrested for exercising his Second Amendment, and that was he tried to explain. He said if you had to explain military maneuvers or military drills to an alien, he said, what would it be? And he said, well, they get in these big boats and they drive them around in a big circle and burn up a whole bunch of gas and point guns at each other, and nobody really does anything. And he goes, that's military maneuvers. That's what we're dealing with. So it is once again, if you break it down to the actual, grammar, logic, and rhetoric of what it is, it as to quote Joe Rogan, it's just it's silly. Government is it's silly to think that we have to have people go do and have a voice of reason for us when 9 times out of 10 they don't have any reason, nor do they use any logic whatsoever. It is all personal gain, like he said in the video. So anyway, now joining me as I finally got my my video to work and finally got my cup of tea out of the microwave. Joining me is Josh Wiley of the Journalistic Revolution. So thank you, Josh, for being on. I think we're going to have a couple more guests before the show is said and done. But what did you make of that? I don't know if you could hear it because we were trying to get the technical stuff worked out. But what did you make of the synopsis of that 3-minute clip of what government is?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. And I've actually heard the entirety of that Larkin Rose talk as well. And he did an interesting kind of extended interview with Richard Grove about this specific talk on an episode of Peace Revolution. I forget exactly what one it was. But it's an excellent and clear, concise way to enumerate to people the fact that government is nothing more than a monopoly on force. And once you do start to exercise the grammar, logic, and rhetoric of government, and as Mark Passio points out, if we look at the gubernare and mente, the two root words of government, which mean control and mind, government literally is a form of mind control. And it just harkens back to that, I believe it was a John Lennon quote.
Keep you safe from the terrorists, Josh.
Oh, that, yeah, and make sure that, people exercise their love properly, sure. And, are safe on those airplanes.
Absolutely. All right, so go ahead and get into your John Lennon quote. I didn't mean to derail you.
Oh, no, it was just, he essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that our society is run by insane, maniacal people for insane, maniacal ends. And, once you really get down to the nitty-gritty about what government is, then you kind of, it's kind of this bold-faced lie that's out in the open, the big lie, as Joseph Goebbels once called it. And that's where we are today as a species.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting as I progress as a human, and as I progress in my as I progress in just I guess my sorry, I'm getting messages and trying to coordinate stuff. Once again, hey, welcome to live radio, everybody. But as I progress as an individual and interviewing Tom Campbell tomorrow, talking about the individual consciousness unit, my own unit of consciousness, as I progress and I start to see the world differently and expand my horizons and expand my sphere of influence, I guess, then you start to really do question. And it's funny that I was talking to a friend of mine today, the guy that you and I spoke about last night on the phone. And by the way, he is definitely very well educated. When I started talking to him about the trivium and the quadrivium, he asked me, he's like, "Have you ever read John Taylor Gatto's work?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I thought you and I had something in common." But anyway, side note, everybody, great books, by the way, and also great interview if you want to watch the what is it called, The Ultimate History Lesson. It's on my website, so you can check it out. wearenotcattle.net. So anyway, what we're looking at is, as I grow as an individual, I start to realize that that the fight isn't really on the political game. And what I mean by that, yes, do we have to wage war on the political front? Absolutely. But that is not where the real game is played. And what I mean by that is I'm starting to figure out that educating myself, educating the people around me, that's what's going to incite real change. And you're going to have to do it through not coercive means like what government does, coercion and aggression and by the barrel of a gun. But you're going to have to do it with what we're going to talk about tomorrow night. We're going to have to do it with love, and we're going to have to do it with not being afraid to be criticized. Because I think that that's one of the things that we run into with a different mode of thinking from the herd. No pun intended with the "we are not cattle," but this is really coming full circle. Is that you do run into a lot of challenges when you run into trying to change somebody's paradigm. And I got another guy coming to join. So here we go. So as soon as I get Rick pulled up, but that's what we're talking about. Is that Rick? Can you hear me? That's what we're talking about. Is that okay, Rick? Yeah, I got you.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
It's okay.
Yeah,
Right,
sorry.
so can you either turn down your external volume down just a hair?
Let me see if
Yeah, is
that'll
that
work. Otherwise, I'll put on my headphones.
better? Yeah, that should be okay.
Yeah, I can do that. How's
All right,
that?
we're good. So anyway, what I was saying before,
Oh, okay.
just to let you know, Rick, we were talking about the nature of government. Rick, Josh Wiley, by the way. Say hello, Josh. So we were talking
Hi,
about the
Josh.
nature of government
It's
and
nice
its
to meet you, Rick.
inception, and the real battle for, obviously we have to wage war on the political front, no pun intended, but we have to wage war obviously in the intellectual battle and try to get people to think about what we really want to accomplish, if we want to accomplish anything with government, and how we want to do this. Because through the preconditioning of the public education system and through the brainwashing that we've experienced over the last 25 to 50 years, that people have really gotten away from an individualistic attitude. And I got you on because we have a little bit of a different, I guess, sphere of influence, and we have a little bit different worldview. But you and I both align on a lot of the same topics, and that is, coercion from the government, corruption from the government. So what I've basically espoused over the last couple of minutes. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
We're against
And
it. Let's
that's,
make
and
that
that's so
clear.
it's so funny is that you get people from different political ideologies, so to speak. And it's funny that I spend a lot of time talking about this. It's like we always spend time infighting on what we want the end result to be, but we focus on what is really going on now. And Lee Camp was on my
Mm,
show, and he said that he's a very far left-leaning individual, and he would be I guess, considered a Green Party politically charged person. But when it gets down to brass tacks, most of these things that we're covering out in media, what you're covering with your articles and things like that, these are just human issues. They're not political issues. So what I'm trying to get people to understand is that don't think that government's going to solve these problems. We need to, as a human species, come together and start having dialogue and have real dialogue with one another, and not just bang rhetoric at one another and say, well, my rhetoric's better than yours, or, you know, my paradigm's better than yours, and here's how we're going to get there. And I don't think that that really mounts up to anything other than, you know, where we're at currently, which is a divide and conquer scenario where the agenda just keeps moving right along and we just sit here and watch it. So
Couldn't agree more. I mean, that's actually, I write about that a lot on my blog, Soldiers for Peace International. My latest blog is called Changing the World, the Psychology of Belief, and it has a lot to do with what you just said. When we start with certain basic beliefs that we never challenge, then we can't even have a conversation with somebody that starts with different beliefs. Even the same words mean totally different things to us. But in reality, we have so many common values. There's so many issues that we have to work together on, because really it's us against the government. And if we want a government that's going to be of, by, and for the people, then we have to work together, because you can't have a representative democracy unless your representatives know what the hell you agree on.
And it also
So we
reaches
gotta have
back
this
to, you know,
conversation.
it also
That's why I
reaches
love
back
this
to what
show.
we were talking about before, in the fact that, you know, it's an informed populace is what we need. We need the informed populace first, and that's why, you know, I got sucked up into the political realm and thought that it would be something great to go out and wave signs and get people involved politically, and that's all well and good. But the small faction that you get involved politically don't have any very good, I guess, means to propagate that message of, hey, we're on a united front here. Let's not, you know, infight with one another. So that's why I've come to this realization, and I thought that this was going to come, you know, sooner rather than later. Because when I started the show, I wanted people to understand the big agenda, what was going on from the power brokers' perspective. And then I kind of whittled down to an activist perspective. And so now that I've finished up with my activism and started, not to say that I'm ever going to stop, because I won't, because I think it's very important to be physically active, because that's what's going to change. You know, being visible is something different than being a Facebook advocate. Nothing against those people, but I mean, it is. It's something to be a digital advocate, and then there's something to be an actual physical advocate or activist. And so now that I've progressed, it's now I take the platform that I have with the listeners and the audience that I have as an opportunity to instruct, to question, and to challenge the status quo. And so that's what we're here to do now, is to really challenge the status quo and what we want government to be, if we want government to exist at all. And that's the real question. You know, from, like you said, the moral imperative or the predisposition that we have to have government. Government has to be there because it's always existed. Well, I think that we can mostly agree that we all have pretty similar values. I'm not going to steal stuff from you. You're not going to steal stuff from me, and you're not going to try to kill me, and I'm not going to try to kill you. But if you try to kill me, I have the opportunity to defend myself. And so that's what was put in print by the founding fathers, but, well, not necessarily them, the first go around, but the second go around, when they added the Bill of Rights and all that stuff, that's when all this stuff kind of really took shape. But Josh, any comments? I've been kind of rambling, but
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you brought up this specific topic tonight. I don't know if either of you gentlemen have heard about this sort of movement that's making the rounds right now. I believe it's called Operation Constitutional Republic, where it's essentially a group of incredibly disgruntled veterans who, you know, I have a lot of ideological sympathies with, but these people are essentially trying to organize and say the time is now for some kind of violent, bloody overthrow of the government. So, you know, get your AR-15 ready and wait for orders, essentially. And I won't even get into the fact that, you know, we see so many false fomentations of rebellion around the globe right now that this could very well potentially be one of them. But I was kind of engaging with a guy.
That's scary to see.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, as much as I want America to be the next Egypt or Tunisia or Libya or the Ukraine, I'd like to avoid that scenario if at all possible. But I was engaging with one of the supporters on this in the comments section of YouTube, you know, trying to, you know, maintain an even discourse. And he essentially was saying, well, you know, it worked against the British Empire and we'll never be stronger and let's go get them right now. And even barring, you know, kind of the ideological dispute from a standpoint of a revolutionary tactician, I just presented an alternative theory. I said, would you rather enter this long, bloody, extended struggle for the seat of power itself, or would you rather, you know, spread this knowledge to your friends and family and then just withdraw from the system entirely and create something better, you know, on a local level, whether that be a constitutional republic or an egalitarian commune or a voluntary-based system, you know, like these aren't only tactics that will completely and utterly subvert the state without having to fire a shot, but you can do so on your own terms and you know, at your own time. And I'm not saying that the day might not come where, you know, people like ourselves are black bagged en masse, and you know, at that point in time maybe we do start to have to think about physical resistance as a means of self-defense. But until then, I think we have so many wonderful tools to share this information, like the internet. We have so many, because of the economic situation, you know, that we face as a country. So many people are kind of regaining and rediscovering how important things like family and localism are. So, you know, like until that day comes, I think that we have a lot of wonderful options to subvert the state and you know, a peaceful ideological revolution.
Absolutely. Rick,
seems far more
what are
in
your
line
thoughts,
with what
man?
we're talking about than some kind of civil war.
Well, I agree completely. I think that a violent revolution would just be an excuse for them to crack down on us. I mean, that's just what Josh was saying. If they wanted to, they could foment it by starting these groups of agents provocateurs to start violence so they can use it as an excuse to crack down. And then you have a large segment of the American population that's so sheepish that they prefer order over freedom. And they've forgotten what Benjamin Franklin said, you know, that if you prefer order over freedom, you're not going to get either one. So I totally agree with Josh, and I think that what he's talking about is one of two tracks, as I see it, that's very important. I think we need to do both tracks. We have a government. We have a very powerful government. We have to take it on directly, as well as create an alternative. Now, it sounds like you two are a couple of anarchists, which, you know, most people think are very left-wing, but I'm going to guess that you also have a lot of libertarian ideas, which a lot of people associate with right-wing. Well, guess what? I don't have an ideology, and if I had to label myself, I'd call myself what Noam Chomsky does, which is, what do you call himself? A libertarian socialist.
Yeah, an anarcho-syndicalist.
Yeah, just to make people think, you know, because it's really not about ideology. It's about what works and what makes sense and what's fair to everybody, really. And the problem I have with really extreme libertarianism, I don't have a problem with libertarianism because really individual freedom is uber alles almost, except you have to have a sense of social responsibility too, and that's the one place where I have a problem with some
really
people
does,
call themselves
and we hate labels on this show just as much as anybody, because we're individuals and we all have a different perspective. And it's like when I was watching Tom Campbell's lecture where he talked about why he talks about consciousness instead of God, because as soon as you say the word God, just like you were talking about before, Rick, and everybody has a different ideological connotation of that word, and so nobody's ever on the same playing field when they have the conversation, because you could be talking about, you know, pixie dust fairies God, or you could be talking about God with right, correct. I mean, it's a really, you know, big panopticon. So Josh, you said you had your hand up like you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, you know, and you hit the nail on the head just there, Jake, is that I guess what we're all speaking to is that it's very hard to put true individuals in any kind of ideological box. And not that I have so much of an ideological continuity with Karl Marx, but Marx had an excellent quote on the matter where he said essentially like ideology is the worst form of habit.
Love it. Never heard that one.
Which is absolutely true. And Rick, to speak to your point, you know, your criticism of, you know, modern libertarianism is certainly not undue in the sense that, you know, we do have a lot of people within this movement that I don't necessarily, this sort of free market will solve everything kind of mentality, which as an ideologically sympathetic anarcho-capitalist, I'd like to agree with to some extent, but there haven't really been any good solutions presented as to how to deal with the psychopathic criminal class that
Right,
seems
and
to
that's what we
gravitate
talked
towards
about
power
before, and that's
within
what
that
I
kind of
always get
system.
into a conversation when
So
you
these are
run into
discussions
somebody
that are
defines
important to
himself
have.
as a real Marxist, hardcore communist. It's like, listen, why would you create something that's already a power center for these people that over history have come through and gravitated and controlled the power centers and then controlled the masses through manipulation? And like you said, Rick, the majority of the time it's done through fear propaganda. It's the fear of what's going to happen if oh my gosh, I can't challenge the government. I can't challenge that. They might get me. Really? They might get you? They're going to get all, what, 330 million of us? Really? That's...
Well, that brings you two just brought up a very interesting juxtaposition of ideas, and I would put it a little bit differently. First of all, I agree with everything Josh said, and I agree with what I think you meant to say, Jake, but I would phrase it differently. Josh is absolutely right that a free market might work. The problem is we've never had one, because every time within capitalism, as he said, we've never figured out how to keep the criminals from taking over, because that's all they care about and that's what they work on. And once they get some money, then they get more power, and it gets worse generation by generation. That's the problem with capitalism. Now, as far as communism goes, the fact of the matter is, we've never had a communist government except maybe the Zapatistas. And that's the problem. People say they want communism, but if they fight for it violently, they end up struggling for power at the end. And it's always, oh, the people aren't ready yet to rule themselves, therefore we have to do it until they're ready. And they never give up power. But that's not communism. Communism, in its ideal, is a perfect form of democracy. It's direct democracy starting at the local level, and power only goes above that where it has to, because it involves regions or nations or the whole world. That's the way democracy, real democracy would work, and it is representative democracy once you get above the local level. But at the local level, it's direct democracy. There's never been a true
free market system, and there's never been a truly capital or communistic state. So, understanding that we're basically bathing in fallacies here, but the idea that that we've never had one of these forms of government, or forms of, I guess capitalism would be not only a form of government, but economics as well, and communism the same way. We've never really deployed these in a manner that would be sufficient, because you have the kleptocratic psychopaths that always gravitate towards the levers of power, no matter where they're going to sit, whether they sit in somebody's governmental body, or if they sit in some corporation with a nice neon sign out there that sells you GMO and makes suicide seeds, or whatever they do. But that's correct. That's correct.
And whether it's a capitalist or a communist system, it's still an oligarchy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and both of these terms, communism and capitalism, are much like the term God in that they're mired with connotation, right? When we think about capitalism, right, on a global scale, not only just in America, so many people equate that to state capitalism, which I would more aptly term as fascism. Because this ideal of market interventionism has pervaded all of capitalism before even Adam Smith put his pen to the paper.
He warned us about it, and not enough people remember that. All they remember is the invisible hand, like it's magic or something.
Amen to that, but I mean, it's not going to fix itself overnight. Once again, you have to have the informed populace in order to back some system like that.
That'd be a big step in the right
direction. You have to,
once
again, you have to have some kind of check and balance on the ruling oligarchs. But
well, that
is a perfect example of an issue that people who think of themselves as liberals and conservatives can agree on. I mean, my God, anybody that understands how the monetary system works, even the rudiments,
right,
realizes the banks are in control and they're ripping us off every chance they get. That's where the debt came from. It's a debt to them. if we just repudiate that debt, we can go back to zero. Or, well, not zero, but you know what I mean. We can go way back, cut the debt, slash it, and get the banks out of the process. Establish a national bank.
We could go to a localized system like we used to have before the Bank of Philadelphia,
and then
where you had
we won't. You know, it'll be debt-free money.
You could print your
virtually.
local currency, trade with other communes, and there's just so many different ways to approach this. But I'm glad that we're all kind of on the same level because. And I think this is a very important podcast and a very important conversation for people to hear on both sides of the coin. Whether you're a contemporary liberal, because I don't really align a lot of the, I guess, liberal ideologies being a classically liberal sense. But, you know, everybody wants freedom, right? And that's what liberal means. If you want freedom, that's liberal and in its classical definition. But when you move into the idea that we have a segment of the population, I don't even know what to call these people, that want to use the might of government to make people do social changes for themselves, for the benefit of the social change, and to make themselves feel better, not for the benefit of society. It's almost like I'm going to write my ticket because I feel bad that this happened. So I'm going to go ahead and have some law passed where that can't happen anymore, and that'll make me feel better. And I don't know what we call that portion of the society, but it's almost like a massive empathetic section of society that wants to make everything better with the wave of a wand or the wave of.
The mommy state. Well, the daddy state's pretty damned expensive too. Let me tell you, people that call themselves conservatives now. They don't know the meaning of the term, and I don't mean everybody. I'm talking about politicians and what the corporate media calls conservatives. Has nothing in common with classical conservatism. In reality, if you go back to classical conservatism, classical liberalism, it's not that big a split. It's simply a matter. I mean, conservatives don't believe you should never change and try to improve things. They just think you should keep the best and move forward carefully. And liberals traditionally have been somewhat bolder for whether they're right or wrong. But the truth is that right now, the people that call themselves conservatives have created a fascist society like Josh talks about. The neo-liberals, so-called liberals,
they all end up at the same place, which is where we are currently.
And neoconservatism, you put them together and what you got is neo-fascism.
Yeah, I mean, basically that's what we have. We have a government run by corporations that headed up by ruling oligarchs.
Yep,
Ta-da!
absolutely.
Well, everybody. You don't worry about that. I mean, just 50 years later, they just got a new, they got a new bank and everything was fine,
Isn't that why we fought a revolution?
We all were.
It wasn't even 50 years, it was 20 years, and some people think that's what caused the War of 1812, that the U.S. was goaded into it.
Yeah, if I control the money supply, I care not who makes its laws. Go ahead, Josh. Knock us with some knowledge. You look like you wanted to say something.
He can control the country.
Well, I was just going to say that, what we're speaking to is, Mark Passio is, in some of his work, he touches on this, in that it's all about this left brain, right brain kind of schism, in that, the American people truly are brain damaged without really noticing it. And the majority of liberals do have daddy issues, or mommy issues, excuse me. They want government to be a caretaker, and conservatives have daddy issues because they want government to be the protectorate, and libertarians just have slavery issues because they only want to be whipped 3 days out of the week instead of 7. And as we get back to all this, but we talked about the Federal Reserve, and Rick just mentioned the Rothschild family and some of their more insidious connections to the financial history of America. But I think it's really incredible today in that we have people like Bill Still, who did the Money Masters series, who talks about the colonial script and the greenback type program, which I don't necessarily know that I'm in complete support of, but I think it's an interesting idea that should most certainly be tried. But it's what amazes me is the ability of our ruling oligarchs to even control the opposition. in that, the most vocal opponents to the Federal Reserve at this point in time are proponents of the gold standard, which, a brief glimpse at history and the battle between the free silver movement and William Jennings Bryan and the gold standard people of the late 1800s, like it's very clear that if they can't print their own currency in the form of debt, then a gold-based standard is what the ruling financial oligarchs want. So when we hear people like Murray
That's why they're
Rothbard,
buying all the gold.
exactly, and that's what I have it written down in my little book. It's like, oh, Ron Paul supporters hailing standards of old, have you really forgotten who owns all the gold? And it's totally
Absolutely.
true,
And it's a very
it still
slippery
amazes
slope
me
that
how
we
easily,
go
even as
down
we become
when
more
you
enlightened, we are
start
also
talking about
co-opted.
alternative currencies. I mean, look at, Bitcoin was one of those things that came out gangbusters, and everybody was talking about how it was going to be the next great thing. And I was on the bandwagon for a little while, and then started doing a little bit more digging. And then Josh brought up a really good question to me. He said, "Hey, who is the founder of Bitcoin? Why don't you find that?" And so he let me toil on that for a couple of nights. And then you can never find who really took credit for writing the program and who really took credit for all this stuff. So it's like, okay, so it's some shady guy that decided he was going to be against central banks. So once again, co-opting, they see the movement in place, and this is why what I'm going to talk to Tom about tomorrow is going to be so incredible, because I believe, and this is just my philosophical belief, that with all the technology in place, if they could game the system and predict movements, I'm talking about the financial ruling oligarchs and the people that really do pull the levers of power, if they can game the system and understand where society is going to go, then they can do exactly what Josh said and put somebody in place to co-opt the movement before the movement gets out of control or challenges their power structure or their paradigm. And that's why I think it's so important for us to have conversations like this to come together and say, no, we got to create a solution outside of our little flags that we all carry. Everybody carries their, I'm a libertarian, I'm a voluntarist, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a classical liberal, I'm a neoliberal. Just put your flags down and let's figure some shit out. Can we do that? I mean, this is, and I don't mean to cuss on my own show. I always talk to myself about not doing that. But at this point in history, we really do have to get real with one another and say, listen, there are a lot of common threads along these lines. So let's figure out what those are, figure out what the commonalities are, push for that, and then we'll figure out the other stuff a little bit later on down the road. And yeah, Josh, and that's why when I looked at alternative currencies and Bitcoin kind of circling the wagons a little bit, when I saw what was going on, and then when I read that JP Morgan had a cryptocurrency laying and waiting since 1999, and if anybody has ever studied any history of the financial oligarchs, they know the significance of JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase owns the entirety of the food stamps that get processed in the United States. So they have big business there. They're the money masters. And so when you look at, they had a cryptocurrency laying and waiting. I saw Bitcoin as a trial balloon. I sold Bitcoin at $1,100. Eat it, everybody. And so I took my I took my fiat currency and ran. But at that point, you have to realize that these people have gotten so much technology behind them, so much data, which is very key, because with the data you can actually predict what's going to happen. And if they could predict that Bitcoin was going to be something that they were going to trial balloon and then roll out something later to see if the masses would buy a totally cryptic currency that has no backing with anything whatsoever except for ones and zeros, I think that that's highly probable. So go ahead.
Well, the thing about JP Morgan that we also have to remember is, these people are controlling financial oligarchs, but they're also masters of controlled opposition. If we look at it on the macro scale, JP Morgan, if anyone out there has followed Anthony Sutton's research and his book Wall Street and the Rise of the Bolsheviks, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, etc., etc., it's very clear that JP Morgan it was instrumental in providing the startup capital for the Russian Revolution of 1917. So, and then even on a smaller scale, we've got R. Gordon Wasson in the spiritual realm being the chief, essentially, propagandist for J.P. Morgan before he goes on to become a witting CIA agent and kind of spends most of his time subtly debunking, but not really, the theories of what was the gentleman's name? John M. Allegro, author of The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. So whether it's grand political movements or even our ideals of God, we have J.P. Morgan kind of with their dirty little hands in it. And if we want to talk about God in the modern sense, which to most people on this planet would probably be
Very
equated
nice.
to money,
And
it
let's
wouldn't
not
surprise
forget that
me if
George
they're
Soros
also
really likes those people in the
fomenting
Ukraine. That's why he's
the
funding
false
them.
Bitcoin rebellion, as I like to call it.
Really wants them to have freedom. So how dare we be informed? Rick, what do you got to add, man, if anything?
He liked the people of Egypt too, right?
Not a lot. Obviously Josh has done a lot more reading about
That's his,
about this than I have. This last topic he brought up.
that's his
History of
wheelhouse.
J.P.
So
Morgan and the Russian
we'll stick to the
Revolution,
political
and
jargon for
it's
moving on.
fascinating stuff, but I haven't
Now
had time to
here's
look
my
into
next,
it
I guess,
myself yet.
topic for this little roundtable discussion we have here. How and it says we got like 18 minutes, but we can go over if we want to, because I'm pretty sure this conversation will go over. How close is America to really having a financial dictator? And the reason I term it a financial dictator is because he's basically going to be controlling the corporation that is the United States. And the way that I look at it, with the position that Barack Obama has put himself in, and with not leaving aside George W. Bush, who put a lot of executive orders in place with Presidential Directive 51 and all kinds of other contingency plans for just in case these people kind of go crazy and we have a revolution, here's how we're going to kind of deal with this stuff. We're going to put everybody into camps. We're going to code them with their social security number. We got all this stuff figured out. What's the real plan? You guys can't see it. But I'm on the Department of Homeland Security board. No, you can't see it. So actually, I've played that clip a couple times. But utilizing the power of the pen from the presidential standpoint and the executive standpoint, do really face an almost a dictatorial president in our near future. Rick, what do you think, man?
Well, no, I think that our president is closer to a stenographer than a dictator. Um, so they're vetted by much more powerful interests. I mean, who the hell was Barack Obama before they made him a senator and then president? He was a community organizer. He's not the power behind the throne, and he knows it. I mean, he collected all that money. We can argue about how much he really collected from small donations, but he collected a whole bunch of money from small donors, and then the banksters came by and doubled it. They doubled it.
Sure.
And and they gave McCain a bunch too, but obviously they expected Obama to win, and they made it so. And he knew what he was getting into, and he is following orders. Now he still has the chance to go his own way, but he's not stupid. He knows what happened to Kennedy. Kennedy tried to get off. What am I trying to say? He tried to let the government print its own money. Essentially, that was one of the things he did. I don't think that's what
he
he
told
got
him
him
no,
killed.
that he wouldn't pull the false flag
the
to invade Cuba.
military-industrial complex that got him killed. But that was just the first step. If you read JFK and the Unspeakable, there was a whole series of steps he took, right up to American University speech, when he said straight out he wanted to end the Cold War. He negotiated a partial nuclear test ban treaty against the wishes of 80% of the public, until he convinced them it was the right thing to do. That made him so powerful and so popular. They had to kill him because war is very profitable, and that's what the entire power structure.
I probably should
have
phrased my question in this statement, in the fact that not President Barack Obama becoming a dictator, but making the office of the presidency a financial dictatorial office, to where they can rule by edict rather than rule by congressional committee. I probably should have phrased it that way. So it's bad verbiage.
Yeah, well, I mean, But speaking to that directly, I would say that, it's not that, this is some kind of eventual future contingency. This is something that's already here and has been here for at least the past 70 years. These same financial, this same financial ruling class has written for decades about the fact that they wanted the office of the presidency, potentially even since the inception of this country, because it had the potential to become, this office that could write laws and pass decrees, with the verdict of one man. That's a tremendous asset to the ruling class. And speaking to Kennedy, I don't necessarily believe that he was, although I believed for years that the Silver Certificate program was attempted to be instituted by Kennedy. I actually wrote an article on journalisticrevolution.com about how Kennedy was no proponent of sound money. There are various quotes about Kennedy attempting to demonetize silver, and Executive Order 11110 actually did exactly that, if you kind of dig into the idiosyncrasies of it all, because the Silver Certificate program had been essentially unhindered since 1878 with the passage of the Bland-Allison Act, and it ended in 1964 at the behest of Kennedy. So I think that there's a little bit of the muddying of the waters going on with that area of history.
Could be. You're the economics expert.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring it up, though, because these people who promote this myth are largely from the John Birch Society, which was founded by the father of the Koch brothers. So this is a deep, long, kind of psyop in that sense. But speaking to some of the other elements of the Kennedy assassination, his speech at American University is certainly an excellent example, and his famous secret society speech, where he talks about, America not being beholden to people of secret oaths and secret proceedings. And a lot of people will attempt to say, well, he's talking about the communists. But I don't know many communists with secret handshakes or secret oaths or secret well, maybe secret proceedings, but the rest of it I don't think really applies.
Well,
I've never heard that interpretation. That's pretty comical. Some people will bend over backwards.
Deal with ego
to
death.
stick
What do you
to
mean
their
you just
ideology.
fractured my paradigm? I refuse to believe that. I choose not to believe you. I think it's very interesting that we all kind of joke about this, because it's really what we do face, and you have to get out and you have to get people to challenge the status quo. And I don't even think the majority of Americans understand what the status quo really is. I really don't, and I don't think that they understand. And most of them don't even understand history. Lee Camp did a great 3-minute video that was that encapsulates basically smashing the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, because he talks about how he's like, they're going to teach us some real history and they don't teach you anything. He's like, they're going to teach us how Christopher Columbus was this ruthless tyrant that went and raped and pillaged everybody and conquered the New World, and actually conquered a land that 30 million people already lived on, but he found it and all this other stuff. And of course they don't show you that. They show you the the nice little fluffy Christopher Columbus that came in and helped everybody, and then went back to Spain and said, look what I found. Not, hey, there's probably a bunch of land here, and I'm pretty sure these guys with swords and spears, we can probably take them all with our with our arm.
Yeah.
That's a very fair statement.
Yeah,
So,
I call it the
all right,
Nazis and Aliens channel
We got
anymore,
11
because
minutes.
every
Let's
time
see
I
if we
turn
can
on
wrap it
History
up.
Channel, whenever I rarely
what do
do,
we
that's all
really
that's
see
playing.
in the future? If we can extrapolate out 5 years, let's say that we can get, let's say that, can we generalize and say that maybe 5% of the population is understanding where we're at, both as a financial society and as a political society? Can we all agree that maybe 5% of the population understands where we're at currently? Is that something? 5% understand that something is wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You know,
I mean,
it's
which are the most important parts?
So,
that's a tough one to answer.
if we get in the next 5 years, let's say that we double
Yeah,
our numbers.
okay.
If we get 10% of the population to understand that
Mhm.
there are some real challenges facing this dream that they call the American dream, which it is a dream, people. That's why they call it the American dream, because you've been dreaming it since you were a child. But where do you see all of this going? Rick, I'll go to you first. Where do you see us going, both politically and let's go politically, militarily, and then monetarily? What do you see happening?
Well, it all depends on how well we do our job. What we have is on the liberal side anyway, we have some people with really big platforms who are really just bitching about the way things are and saying, let's all take to the streets and, follow me and let's have a revolution. But they don't really have any practical solutions. They just want to complain about what is and not propose an alternative. And what we need to do is people like you and me and Josh need to make them understand, both people out there, for liberal causes and people out there for conservative causes and all of those causes that intersect. We need to make them understand on both sides. Politics is not civil war. When it is, that's how they use it to divide and conquer us. Politics means figuring out how to get together on issues and have a unified message. It does not mean somebody at the top says what the message is and we all follow. It means we have a conversation about how best to present the message. And I think what we're doing on this show is a really good illustration of how we can talk together, avoid buzzwords. If we have to use a word like conservative or liberal to sort of make a point, we started out by defining what we meant by that. It's not an insult in either case.
I think that you make a very strong point, and I think that's why
people
Josh
who don't
I always
understand
harp on the
it,
trivium.
Everybody else
is that once you understand the grammar of where that person's coming from, then the logic and the rhetoric really do fall into place. It's like, well, here is what my definition of the word that we just spoke means. And then what is your definition? Okay, well, can we both agree that this would be a good definition for us to go by? And if you both agree, then you can have a conversation around that word. And now you've had, like you were saying, a productive discussion over the terms that we're trying to define and the way that we're trying to move society. So, Josh, what do you got?
Well, speaking to, this kind of, as Zbigniew Brzezinski would call it, the global political awakening, if we speak to that as a whole, I'm fairly optimistic in that, so many people are coming across this information, some of it from more dubious sources than others. But, on the front of monetary, political, and military change in the next 5 years specifically, I'm going to have to revert back to pessimist mode and take these one by one. On a monetary level, I think that what Jim Wiley, the economic analyst over at goldenjackass.com, has to say is very apt. I do think that we are going to see a split in the dollar, in that we will have a gold-backed trade currency where the government and corporate America will essentially retain most of its power on the global scale. And the debt-based note that you get in your pocket right now is the one that will experience all kinds of inflation and stagflation later on, and really kind of sell us all down the river. I think that this is what these people have planned, and it's probably going to come to fruition within the next 5 years. Politically, unfortunately, more of the same. Even with people like Rand Paul, vying for the presidential spot. We look at the history of his financial backers at this moment, and one of his most ardent supporters, financially and otherwise, is Karl Rove. So I think we all know where that's headed, and unfortunately, too many people are swallowing that deception, even people who think they know what's going on. And militarily, I think that we're really going to start to see a shift away from the Middle East and towards the Central Asian Caucasus. I think that to a certain extent, this is what aspects of the Boston bombing were about, kind of shining the light on this Chechen terror issue that has been an issue for a very long time and has been funded and founded by the CIA and deep political entities for a very long time. But, and now, especially with these bombings in Russia that happened in December and the threats by Bandar Bush of the Sochi Olympics, I do think that the theater of war, similar to the shift away from the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia in the 70s and 80s, is about to take place.
Well, I was speaking specifically of political because I think that's the only place that we can make a lot of change in the near-term future. And that's because if we do get a nucleus that really understands, and I didn't really finish my point, I said if these people that have big platforms understand and start talking about what's really important, in a focused way, instead of just like, oh, there's this problem, there's that problem, there's this problem, there's that. Wait a minute, no. What are the solutions? I'm working on a constitutional amendment that would end corporate constitutional rights and take the first step toward reforming campaign finance, an important couple steps. That's a place that we can actually accomplish something, because there's already a movement for it. And there are conservative groups like American for Prosperity and liberal groups that are starting to work together, and they're getting past that ideology and realizing, hey, we don't all have to agree on exactly what kind of government we want at the end, but we do know corruption is the biggest problem. We're never going to get there if we don't deal with the corruption, and that's why a constitutional amendment is so important. I think I'm working on something called the Pledge to Amend campaign, and we're organizing here in Oregon, and we are reaching out to, there's at least one Americans for Prosperity group that's already joined. It's in a more conservative part of the state. And we're hoping they're going to formally join our coalition, which is mostly nonpartisan groups. Some, I guess you'd call liberal, if you have to label. But anyway, we're trying to get people to work together to organize teams in all the major cities in Oregon where the candidates go to campaign for Congress and ask questions about, put people on the spot in public, where the sheeple, well, not the sheeple, the people aren't paying attention to that issue but do care about politics and show up to these things, will learn, hey, wow, we could do this. You know, this is important. I wonder what Senator so-and-so or his challenger is going to say, you know, and then they'll listen and then they'll get it. Because if we make that a litmus test in all the congressional elections as soon as possible, this isn't going to happen in one election cycle, but over election cycles, if we make it a litmus test, then we can elect a Congress that will actually pass a constitutional amendment. Can you imagine that? That would undercut the power of corporations and the oligarchy
once you saw the fact
to determine
that
who we get to
were
vote
given the
for.
same entities
That's a
and
good
the same
first
rights
step.
as human beings.
And we can do it.
And that was back in the, I want to say the late 80s, early 90s. I want to say early 90s. Because I actually remember hearing this, and I've actually been listening to political talk radio since I was 14 when I was driving and I used to listen to Neil Bortz. If anybody understands libertarian views, they know who Neil Bortz is. I used to listen to him on the way in every morning. Yeah, see, so I've been politically charged for a long time, but that's the one thing I remember him ranting and raving about was the campaign finance, where corporations have the same rights as humans and they can donate whatever lump sum they want to as long as it goes to a PAC or whatever like that. And that's where your boy Karl Rove comes in, Josh, and you look like you wanted to say something else. Karl, God, he loves you. He just have a nice conservative government that pays off his corporations.
Oh, I just wanted to He's like your kind, portly grandpa. I can imagine him like being a mall Santa somewhere. Although I don't know if I'd let my child sit on the lap of a war criminal. But oh God, it makes me cringe. But speaking kind of directly to what Rick was talking about, and some of these more encouraging and substantive changes that can be made on the political level. I think that there are a lot of encouraging things going on right now. What the people at offnow.org are trying to do, where there's this massive NSA data center in Utah that needs the support of a local town to use their water to essentially cool these supercomputers. And these people are organizing, again, at the local level, completely bypassing these federal mandates to say, no, you can't just play around with our resources like that, especially if you're going to use them to spy on us. You know, so in that sense, like, people are becoming aware of these things. And as we become more aware, hopefully, you know, people like ourselves will be able to tell those around us how we can use the levers of power more successfully, as opposed to, you know, kind of throwing all of our weight behind this one savior like a Ron Paul, who ultimately will either fail or sell you out in the end. So.
Well, Rand Paul already sold out his supporters. I keep forgetting what the issue was, but the minute he got elected, he reversed himself on a really important issue that's fundamental to libertarian philosophy.
He also,
do you remember what it was?
Well, I forget. There have
I
been a couple, but
barbecued
he
my
did vote for
my
the National
local House
Defense
of Representative
Authorization
guy
Act of
over that, and that was
2013, which
good.
had the state.
Ooh,
You voted for the
Yeah, which
CIA?
had the.
Well, we had to
Yeah.
fund the military. I'm like, don't give me that crap. I'm like, uh, what a joke. Do I support the war on terror? No, I don't. No, I don't support any of this. I do
You don't
support the
support the
troops. I
troops,
want them to
Jake?
be brought home so they're not fighting stupid fucking wars for oligarchs. And yes, well, that's what Rick's organization does. And I actually did catch myself from using another profane word on there. That was pretty nice. I'm proud of myself, man. Sometimes this stuff gets you a little fired up. And I had a margarita for dinner, so that'll actually loosen. That will do it.
good job.
Yeah. See. Now I was trying to pace myself. I wanted to be cogent. I
That'll
didn't
do
want to
it.
be slurring
Should
on
have some
camera or
chips with it,
on
and then you
audio
can have
either.
two.
So,
You weren't
so
thinking.
oh, I'm exactly. I'm charming and belligerent
You didn't
at
want
the
to
But
be
same
you're so
time.
much
How
trivial.
is
more
that possible?
charming after a couple drinks, right?
But all right, so guys,
Help you, Tim.
let's go ahead and wrap this up. It's been
Yeah.
an
That's
absolutely
what I tell
great
myself, at
having you on,
least.
Rick, and always good having somebody from a different perspective and a different ideology. Because when we do get people on here from a libertarian standpoint, we basically just sit there and pat each other on the back and talk about how great our ideology is for a lot of the show. But having people come together from different perspectives, bringing different angles to the idea of freedom and individuality really does add a lot to the mix, and can really help us drive the message home that we're not so far apart as the mainstream media would like to make us think that we are. So whatever. I don't even libertarian.
Well, you know something? If you hadn't said you were libertarians, I would not have assumed that at
You can
all
say it.
from what
He's
you
a nerd.
said.
Say it.
And
Yeah,
I
he's a
also
nerd. You can
want
say it. It's
to
fine.
say I'm really glad to meet you, Josh. You're obviously done a lot of
Yeah,
homework.
absolutely. So everybody plug their stuff really quick, and we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. And
Well,
hopefully
thank you so
everybody
much. It
enjoyed
was
this
great to
little
meet you as
roundtable
well, Rick.
discussion
It's always
for
nice
three
to
people trying
share
to make a difference
opinions
in the world.
with
So,
like minds, you know?
Rick, why don't you go ahead, man? Plug all your stuff and where people can find you, and I'll put links in the show notes.
Well, um, sure. I encourage people to go to my website, Soldiers for Peace International. I don't blog a lot, but you can subscribe and see when I get around to blogging. I try to only blog on important stuff, not crap, like a lot of people do to get something out every day. So Soldiers for Peace International also has a link to my radio shows, SFPI Radio and Take Back America, or Taking Back America. And of course, we have a Facebook page, Soldiers for Peace International, and it's a great place to have conversations. We don't tolerate a bunch of ideological BS, and we don't, there's very few things we censor, but we don't allow religious proselytizing. But if somebody wants to make a point and say, the Bible says this, and that's why it's important to a social issue, fine, or the Quran or whatever.
Yeah,
However you want
it's
to make your point, as long as
I
it's
post on
civil,
there
and
quite a bit. I
but the
always
whole
read
idea
your
is to
posts,
get
even though
people
I don't
together, and we've
respond to
got
them.
members
So
from all over the world, over
Rick does a
5,000
good job
members
writing
now. So
writing
Facebook
pertinent
group's pretty
material
cool
for
too.
people that are talking about or having the same conversations that we're all having, because that's really what it's all about. He'll come one day and demonize the mainstream media, and then come the next day and talk about a solution. So I really liked a couple of the pieces that you did going after specific media outlets. So I always like to point out to the sheep, why this is a bad idea, why your boy, you, yeah, no, that's fine, man. I already broke the cherry. We're fine. We're fine. It's
Ed
an R-rated
Schultz.
show now.
Oh
Let's just
God.
try to keep it from being
Wrote
X-rated. So we got like
specifically
three
about a
more
call I
F-bombs we
made to
could
him.
drop,
He's
and
such a dick.
then we move into
I
the
mean,
NC-17 or whatever the rating system is. But Rick, be sure to send me all the links to all your stuff, and I'll post it in the show notes. And Josh, go ahead and plug your stuff, and then I'll wrap my little segment up, and we'll get out of here.
Sure. I'm Josh Wiley. You can find all of my work at www.journalisticrevolution.com. We've got a live radio show that broadcasts Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But the one thing that I'm really excited about right now is we've just launched our first podcast, first in a series entitled Mind the Control. It's a 5.5-hour episode on as a kind of a primer of the history of the CIA. And then the next episode is kind of going to go into the roots of the CIA within the Anglo-American establishment and the Rhodes Roundtable. So that's something that I'm really excited about. So hopefully people will go and download that at journalisticrevolution.com.
That's all right.
Great.
He loves that we don't read. That's what he loves.
Get it? Yeah. Well, it's okay. Don't worry about the power.
It's funny that you mentioned that because on the
Go back
blog
to sleep,
post
America.
to the
Your
website
government
itself,
is in control.
that's the quote that I put at the top by Alan Dulles.
Who was that? Bill.
It's famous. The American people don't read. Bill Hicks.
Well, that was easy for him to accept when we were fat and happy, but now that austerity's setting in, I think people are going to wake up. The old folks are already screaming about their pension checks and stuff, but they're not worried about the kids for the most part, and the kids are not, for the most part, standing up for themselves yet.
Television tells me politics is boring.
With obvious exceptions.
Whatever. What that says. My wife was like, "Have you seen this twerking?" I'm like, "What is that?" She's like, "It's a dance." I'm like, "Yo, good God." And that's when I came to the realization that I'm no longer hip anymore. And so now I wear the same jeans that I've worn since college. So, and actually the same T-shirt right here has been in existence for 14 years, everybody. I'm not a bum. I just wash my shit and take care of it. See? Number 2, S-bomb. But anyway, that's it for the show, everybody. Thank you so much for both my guests, Rick. How do you pronounce your last name so I don't butcher it? Okay, Rick Staggenborg and Josh Wiley of the Journalistic Revolution. Rick Staggenborg for Veterans for Peace and Soldiers for Peace. Is that right?
Staggenborg.
Okay, great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having both of you guys on. Thank you so much for tuning into the show, everybody. I'll be doing the interview for Tom Campbell tomorrow, airing the interview on Thursday night. And once again, everybody, get a friend, get informed, and get involved. And when I mean get involved, I don't mean to get out there and wave a little banner around. I mean get involved in conversation with your fellow human beings, and let's try to fix this stuff. Take care, everybody. I got your dancing on video. I'll edit that out.